Okay, so getting back into our coverage over Age of Apocalypse, we do pick up with X-Men issue number 4. Now, this is the last issue for X-Men as we get into the whole idea of him being transported over to the main Marvel universe. Because, like I said in the last few videos, when it comes to X-Men Omega, it's going to be used as a way to wrap up our coverage over this event. But once it is wrapped up, you do have a few characters being able to make it over into the main Marvel universe. So, for example, you'll have Nate Gray, the Sugar Man, Dark Beast, and I think there are a few more characters who do make it over to the main Marvel universe. And so for X-Men, his series continues on. Issue 4 is just the last issue of his series that takes place in this timeline. By issue 5, we go into the main Marvel universe and seeing Nate Gray trying his best to get used to the idea of being in a brand new reality. But as we get into the opening pages of this storyline, we really pick up with Apocalypse right now talking to the Shadow King. Because for Apocalypse, he was able to detect a very powerful mutant. Really, it was the Shadow King who was able to detect a very powerful mutant, and that would be Nate Gray. And so for Apocalypse, he's kind of like, hey, you know what? I want that mutant on my side. And so in the last 2 issues of this series, you had Domino, who had worked for Apocalypse as one of his best assassins, try to go after Nate Gray as a way to bring him over to Apocalypse's side. The problem was that Nate Gray had technically shut down the brain of Domino in this reality, and so she failed. And so it's the Shadow King saying like, hey man, listen, so I just got word that Domino and her team had just failed. Her mind is completely shut off, and her team was killed off by the rest of Nate Gray's team. And so for Apocalypse, he kind of realized that how powerful Nate Gray truly is and how dangerous Nate Gray could be for him in the far future. And so for Apocalypse, he wants to get rid of Nate Gray, but for right now, he has to focus on Magneto, who's currently his prisoner. But now we're going to jump back over to Nate Gray. And when we do, it's really more of Nate Gray just going at it on Mr. Sinister of this reality. Because remember, when it came to Nate Gray, it was Marvel kind of answering the question of, hey, we have all these different versions of different characters from our old timeline, but what about Cable in this reality? And the problem was, you had to do things differently because Madeline Pryor was not in this reality, and Jean Grey and Scott Summers were not together. Jean Grey was with Logan, better known as Weapon X. And so you had Sinister being able to take the DNA samples of Scott Summers and also Jean Grey to, make a child out of their samples, which of course gave us Nate Gray. And so Nate Gray is beginning to find out that Mr. Sinister had created him in a lab. But right now, it's Nate Gray wanting to kill Lost Sinister because Sinister had killed off Forge, and Forge was like a father to Nate Gray. Forge was in Nate Gray's corner. And so this is Sinister realizing how powerful Nate Gray is. And Nate Gray could possibly kill off Mr. Sinister. And so you do have Mr. Sinister tell Nate Gray like, hey, listen, I created you. I made you. Here, look into my mind. And so when you have Nate Gray look into the mind of Mr. Sinister, he realized like, yeah, he was created in a lab, that Nate Gray was not born in your usual way where you have 2 parents coming together to produce a child. And so for Nate Gray, he begins to freak out. And the thing is, he also begins to see in Sinister's mind the day he had escaped. Now, we had talked about this before because it was Scott Summers helping Nate Gray being able to escape. And so for Nate, he's wondering how in the world does Sinister know about this moment? And it's Sinister saying, because I was there too, but I hid in the shadows. Watch as your father basically helped you escape all those months ago. And so is Nate Gray realizing that Sinister is not lying, that he was created in a lab. But it's also Mr. Sinister saying, like, hey, listen, I created you as a way to possibly be used to kill Apocalypse if it ever comes a day where he needs to be taken down. And unfortunately for you, Nate, that day has now arrived. Apocalypse must be stopped before he causes death across the entire world. Now, as soon as you have Sinister say that to Nate Gray, you have Sauron and also Siren appear. Now, as we all know, these two people were part of Forge Crew. And Forge Crew, they were better known as the Outcasts, a group of characters who were traveling out in the west part of North America and putting on shows for different groups of humans. But at the same time, they were also taking down different facilities that belong to Apocalypse. Now, for Nate Gray, he tells them to leave. He said, hey, listen, I want to handle this man on my own. And the reason why, because for Nate Gray, he kind of realized that to Sinister, he's just his puppet to use. And so for Nate, he hates the idea of being a puppet. And so you have Nate Gray just beat down on Sinister over and over and over again, to the point where you have Sinister begin to bleed. And so as you have Nate Gray leave, you have Sinister realize that he might possibly die here. So he lays on the ground, and we're kind of left to believe in the possibility that Mr. Sinister is now dead. But right after you have Nate Gray defeat Mr. Sinister, he goes over to Siren to say goodbye to her because he remembers what Forge told him in our last video. You have to find Magneto. You need to find Magneto now. And so for Nate Gray, that is his current mission, to find Magneto. And so you have Nate Gray leave. Now, his mind is connected to Magneto. And so with their minds being connected, he's seeing Apocalypse right now just wiping the floor with Magneto. And that tells Nate Gray he needs to hurry, but at the same time, where to go. And so you have Nate Gray leave to go find Magneto, but to hopefully stop Apocalypse as well. Can't believe I just said Nate Gray. Now, the ending of the storyline really does lead into one of our earlier videos where I had mentioned the fact that when it came to Factor X, it took place after this moment right here, but I wanted the X-Men series to not be tied into the other X books in each of our videos when it came to Age of Apocalypse. But either way, when it comes to X-Men, when he does arrive at the base of Apocalypse, he does sense something, and so he heads over to that location. Now, at first, he believes the possibility it could be Magneto or Apocalypse, but it's not. It's actually Cyclops and Jean Grey of this reality, technically his parents. And so once he does confront Jean Grey, his mind and her mind, they instantly connect with one another. Now, if you saw my Factor X video, we learned that after this moment right here, Jean Grey gets supercharged because, well, Nate Gray had really showed her her full potential of her abilities. But with all that being said, you have Jean Grey and Scott realize that there's some kind of connection between them. But unfortunately, Nate Gray does not tell them. And you have Nate Gray leave. And the reason why, because he has to handle Apocalypse. And this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see you next time. Later.